Floyd Whitaker didn't believe in ghosts, but his daughter had become one anyway. Ember sat on the nursery floor arranging blocks in perfect rows. 7 across, 4 deep. The same pattern. Every day since the accident. She hadn't looked up when he entered. She never did. The maid appeared at his elbow. "Mr. Whitaker, I need to give notice. Effective immediately. That's the 7th resignation this quarter." "She doesn't blink enough," the woman whispered. "It's not natural." Floyd's alpha presence filled the hallway, making her step back. "My daughter is traumatized, not possessed. If you can't handle a grieving child, then leave." Left. They always did. His assistant's message came seconds later. "One candidate just arrived unannounced. Won't leave. Security can't remove him. Should I send him away?" Floyd had 17 minutes before his board meeting. "Send him to the west sitting room." 5 minutes. Iverson Smith looked like a man who'd given up before he arrived. Rain-soaked sweater, fogged glasses, cheap shoes. He sat hunched in the leather chair, hands folded, perfectly still. Floyd poured scotch without offering one to his guest, letting his pheromones saturate the air. Dominance that usually made betas fidget. Iverson didn't move. "You have 3 minutes," Floyd said. "Convince me you're not wasting my time. I'm here for your daughter. Not for you." Iverson's voice was soft but carried weight beneath it. "Your staff quit because they expected a normal child. Ember's in survival mode. You need someone who understands trauma, not behavioral charts." Floyd drained his scotch. "I'm running a $3 billion company while preventing a hostile takeover. I need someone to keep my daughter alive and out of my way. Can you do that?" "I can do that. I have rules. Ember doesn't leave this estate. No visitors. No therapist. You feed her, bathe her, keep her breathing. That's the job. I don't have a problem with your parenting, Mr. Whitaker." Floyd grabbed his $20,000 scotch and deliberately poured it onto the Persian rug. "Pick that up. Show me you understand your place." Iverson lowered himself to his knees and began scrubbing with a handkerchief. Floyd felt the rush of control, a beta accepting his role. "You start tomorrow. 6 a.m. Don't be late." Floyd didn't see Iverson's shadow stretch wrong across the wall. Didn't hear the exhale that carried ozone and something ancient. Upstairs, Ember stopped arranging blocks and whispered her first word in 4 months. "Safe." In the sitting room, Iverson stood. Behind his glasses. His eyes flickered molten gold. The predator had been invited in. Now came the part where the alpha learned what it meant to be prey. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and let me know which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now back to the story. Iverson arrived at 6 a.m. exactly, carrying nothing but a worn duffel bag and the same apologetic posture that made him look like he was perpetually bracing for a blow. Floyd intercepted him in the foyer, coffee in hand, already irritated by the man's existence. "The staff entrance is around back," Floyd said without preamble. "You don't use the main doors. Ever." "Understood, Mr. Whitaker." Iverson adjusted his glasses, those thick frames catching the morning light. He looked even more pathetic in daylight. The gray sweater had a hole near the collar, and his shoes squeaked slightly on the marble. Floyd gestured toward the grand staircase with a dismissive wave. "Ember's room is on the 3rd floor, east wing. She wakes at 7, eats at 8. The kitchen staff have her meal schedule. You keep her occupied until bedtime at 8 p.m. I don't want to hear her, see her, or be interrupted by anything short of a medical emergency. Questions?" "No, sir." "Good. Stay out of my way." Floyd turned toward his office, then paused, unable to resist one more demonstration of dominance. "And Iverson, if you think yesterday was hazing, you're mistaken. That's just how things work here. I don't coddle my staff, and I don't apologize for having standards. If you can't handle that, there's the door." Iverson's response was barely above a whisper. "I can handle it, Mr. Whitaker." Floyd left him standing there and told himself the unease crawling up his spine was just caffeine jitters. By noon, Floyd had forgotten the nanny existed. A conference call with the Singapore office bled into an emergency meeting about the merger terms Jessica Crane kept revising. His assistant brought lunch to his desk. His lawyer called twice. The world of billion-dollar decisions and hostile corporate warfare consumed him entirely, the way it always did, the way it needed to. It wasn't until 4 p.m., when he went to the kitchen for his third espresso, that he encountered Iverson again. The nanny was at the service counter, speaking softly to the head chef about Ember's dinner preferences. He looked even smaller in the vast commercial kitchen, dwarfed by stainless steel and the chef's imposing presence. "She hasn't eaten protein in 3 days," Iverson was saying, his tone patient and non-confrontational. "Just toast and apple slices. I'd like to try something softer. Maybe chicken broth with rice. Something warm that doesn't require much chewing." The chef, a gruff alpha named Marcus who'd worked for Floyd for 6 years, was actually nodding. "I can do a simple congee. My grandmother's recipe. It's gentle. That would be perfect. Thank you." Floyd cleared his throat and both men turned. Marcus straightened immediately, his posture shifting to attention. Iverson just blinked behind his glasses, waiting. "Is there a problem with the meal plan I approved?" Floyd asked, his voice edged with irritation. "No problem, sir," Iverson replied. "Just making adjustments based on Ember's current appetite. She's been undereating. Then make her eat what's served. I'd rather earn her trust first." Iverson's tone remained maddeningly calm. "Forcing her will only reinforce her anxiety." Floyd felt his alpha instincts flare. Being contradicted by a beta, especially one he'd hired less than 12 hours ago, made his sense sharpen with aggression. "I'm not paying you to psychoanalyze my daughter. I'm paying you to keep her fed and out of my hair. Do your job, or I'll find someone who will." "Yes, Mr. Whitaker." No emotion. No flinch. Just bland acceptance. Floyd grabbed his espresso and left, but the exchange gnawed at him for the rest of the afternoon. There was something deeply wrong about Iverson's lack of reaction. Betas were supposed to show deference, discomfort, submission when faced with alpha displeasure. This one just stood there like a stone in a river, letting the current flow around him. That night, Floyd worked until past midnight, reviewing contracts in his study. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. He should have been focused on the acquisition clauses in Section 12, but instead he kept wondering if the nanny had managed to get Ember to eat. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself he was just ensuring his investment wasn't being wasted. He was lying. At 1:15 a.m., a sound cut through the silence. Not loud, but piercing in its familiarity. A child's scream, thin and terrified, echoing from 3 floors above. Floyd was moving before he consciously decided to, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Ember's night terrors had been a constant since the accident. Shrill, desperate sounds that tore through the house and sent staff fleeing. The last nanny had quit after the 5th consecutive night of screaming. He reached the 3rd-floor hallway, breathing hard, and stopped outside Ember's door. It was cracked open, and through the gap, he could see Iverson kneeling beside Ember's small bed. The night light cast everything in soft blue, making the scene look like something underwater. Ember was sitting up, her little body rigid with panic, her mouth open in another scream that hadn't yet emerged. Her hands clutched the blanket in white-knuckled fists, and her eyes were wide and unseeing, locked in whatever nightmare had captured her. Iverson wasn't touching her, wasn't trying to shake her awake or speak loudly over her fear. He was just there, kneeling at eye level, his hands resting gently on his own knees. And he was humming. It wasn't a melody Floyd recognized. It was low and resonant, thrumming in a register that seemed to bypass the ears and go straight to the chest. The sound filled the room like warm water, and as Floyd watched, transfixed, Ember's rigid posture began to soften. Her mouth closed. Her breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, began to slow. Iverson's scent changed. Floyd could detect it even from the hallway. No longer the neutral, blocked nothingness of a beta, but something else entirely. Something that smelled like morning rain on stone, like ozone before a lightning strike, like the ocean at depths where light couldn't reach. Should have been impossible. Scent blockers didn't just fail. And betas didn't produce pheromones strong enough to affect others, especially not traumatized children locked in night terrors. But Ember was leaning toward Iverson now, her small hand reaching out tentatively. Iverson took it with infinite gentleness, still humming that strange, subsonic melody, and Ember's eyes finally focused. She saw him. Really saw him, in a way she hadn't seen anyone since her mother died. "Safe," she whispered. The same word she'd spoken when Iverson first entered the house. "You're safe. You're safe," Iverson echoed softly, his voice layering over the hum. "Nothing here can hurt you. I promise." Ember's fingers tightened around his hand, and then, impossibly, she let him gather her into his arms. She curled against his chest like a small animal finding shelter, and Iverson held her with the kind of care usually reserved for something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. Floyd's hand was on the doorframe, gripping hard enough that the wood grain pressed into his palm. He should intervene. Should assert his authority as her father. Should remind this beta nanny that he was overstepping, that Ember didn't respond to anyone, that this kind of attachment was dangerous and inappropriate. But his alpha instincts were screaming something entirely different. They were screaming submit. Not to back down or leave, but to submit to whatever Iverson was, whatever power was rolling off him in waves that made Floyd's knees want to buckle. It was like standing too close to a reactor core, feeling radiation pour through you, knowing you should run but unable to move. Iverson's eyes lifted. In the blue nightlight, they were no longer brown behind those thick glasses. They were gold. Molten, ancient gold, like something dredged up from the Earth's burning core. 4-3 heartbeats, they stared at each other across the dark room. Floyd, the alpha who'd built empires and crushed competitors, and Iverson, the beta who wasn't a beta at all. Then Iverson's eyes dimmed back to brown, and his scent disappeared behind blockers once more. And he was just a man in a worn sweater holding a sleeping child. "She's settled now," Iverson said quietly. "I'll stay with her until morning, just to be sure." Floyd should have said something. Should have demanded explanations or asserted control or done any of the 100 things an alpha was supposed to do when challenged in his own territory. Instead, he stepped back from the door and walked away on legs that felt like water. In his study, he poured 4 fingers of scotch and drank them without tasting. His hands were shaking. His scent was sour with something he refused to name as fear. What the hell had he brought into his house? And why, despite every instinct telling him to fire Iverson immediately and call security, did some deeper part of him, something old and primal and usually silent, want to go back to that nursery and kneel beside the man like Ember had? Want to feel that impossible safety, that promise of protection, that sense of being seen by something vast and utterly terrifying. Floyd finished the bottle before dawn and told himself he'd imagined the whole thing. But when he finally slept, he dreamed of golden eyes and the sound of thunder from very far away, and he woke up hard and furious and more unsettled than he'd been in his entire life. The merger meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in Floyd's private conference room, and he'd been dreading it for 3 days. Jessica Crane was a shark in Chanel, her reputation for hostile acquisitions preceding her like blood in water. Kyle Jason, her business partner and alleged strategic consultant, was worse, all charm and calculated cruelty wrapped in a $5,000 suit. Floyd had prepared meticulously. New projections, revised terms, a counter-proposal that would make them reconsider their leverage. But as he reviewed the documents that morning, his mind kept drifting to the nursery on the 3rd floor, where Iverson was probably reading to Ember or coaxing her to eat breakfast or doing whatever inexplicable magic he'd been performing for the past week. Ember had spoken 12 words in 7 days. 12 more than she'd spoken in the previous 4 months combined. Floyd told himself he was grateful. Told himself this was exactly what he'd hired the nanny for. Told himself the crawling unease in his gut every time he saw Iverson was just residual stress from work. He was lying and he knew it. At 1:45, Monica knocked on his study door. "Mr. Whittaker. Miss Crane and Mr. Jason have arrived early. They're waiting in the conference room." "Of course they are." Floyd straightened his tie. Deep burgundy silk against a black shirt, alpha power dressing at its finest. "Bring up the tea service. The Darjeeling, not the Earl Grey. And tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." "Already done, sir." Monica hesitated, her tablet clutched to her chest. "Sir, one more thing. Miss Crane asked if you'd be providing entertainment during the meeting." Floyd's jaw tightened. Entertainment. Her exact words were, "I hear the Whittaker household runs on very traditional lines. I'd love to see the famous discipline in action." Monica's expression was carefully neutral. "I believe she's referring to the rumors about staff treatment." Course she was. Jessica Crane collected information like other people collected art, and she'd use anything, any perceived weakness, to gain advantage in negotiations. If word had spread that Floyd ran his household with iron control, she'd want to see it. Want to assess whether his reputation for ruthlessness was earned or exaggerated. An idea formed, cold and sharp and utterly perfect. "Monica, find Iverson. Tell him I need him in the conference room. Immediately." "Sir." "Just do it." She left, and Floyd took a moment to compose himself, letting his alpha pheromones settle into something controlled and dangerous. This would serve multiple purposes. He'd demonstrate his authority to potential business partners, remind his staff of their place, and finally scratch the itch that had been building all week. The need to see Iverson break, to confirm that the man was just a beta with good trauma training, nothing more. The golden eyes had been a trick of the light. The impossible scent had been Floyd's exhausted imagination. And the pull he felt whenever Iverson entered a room was just frustration at the man's unnatural composure. He was lying and he knew it. The conference room was all glass and steel, designed to intimidate. Jessica Crane sat at the far end of the table, her platinum hair styled in a severe bob, her smile sharp enough to cut. Kyle Jason lounged beside her, deceptively relaxed in a navy suit, his handsome face arranged in an expression of polite interest. Both of them radiated alpha pheromones, hers like expensive perfume and gasoline, his like leather and cold metal. "Floyd." Jessica didn't stand. "So glad you could join us. In your own home, no less." "Jessica." "Kyle." Floyd took his seat at the head of the table, projecting calm control. "I appreciate you coming all the way out to the estate. I thought we could discuss the revised terms in a more intimate setting." "How gracious." Kyle's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I have to say, I expected more from the infamous Whittaker stronghold. It's very quiet here. Almost unnaturally so. I prefer peace when conducting business." "Of course you do." Jessica leaned back, her red nails drumming against the polished wood. "Though I hear your household is anything but peaceful these days. 7 staff resignations in 4 months. That must be terribly disruptive." Before Floyd could respond, the door opened. Iverson entered, still wearing that same threadbare gray sweater, his posture apologetic, his eyes hidden behind thick glasses. He looked even more out of place in this room of power and money, like a stray dog that had wandered into a wolf pack. "You needed me, Mr. Whittaker?" His voice was soft, uncertain. "Yes." Floyd didn't look at him. "We're about to begin a very important meeting. I need someone to take notes, but my assistant is occupied. You'll serve as stenographer." Jessica's smile widened. "How resourceful. Is this the famous Nanny everyone's been whispering about?" "This is Iverson Smith. He manages my daughter's care." Floyd gestured to a chair in the corner. "Sit there. Be silent unless addressed directly." Iverson moved to the chair with that same shuffling gait, and Floyd felt his irritation spike. The man was too submissive, too forgettable, to absolutely nothing. It grated against every alpha instinct Floyd possessed. Kyle was watching Iverson with obvious amusement. A male nanny. How progressive of you, Floyd. I didn't think you were the type to embrace modern sensibilities. I embrace competence, Floyd said coldly. Gender is irrelevant. Clearly. Jessica's tone dripped with condescension. Though I have to ask, is he always this compliant? Or is that something you've trained into him? The opening was too perfect to ignore. Floyd stood, walked to where Iverson sat, and looked down at him with the full weight of his alpha presence. Iverson, I'm going to need you to do something for me during this meeting. Something that demonstrates the level of discipline I expect from my staff. Iverson's face remained neutral. Of course, Mr. Whitaker. Come here. Kneel beside my chair. For the first time, something flickered behind those glasses. Not fear, not anger, but something else. Something that made Floyd's spine tingle with warning. But then Iverson stood and walked to Floyd's chair, lowering himself to his knees on the plush carpet without protest. Jessica laughed, bright and delighted. Oh, this is better than I expected. Floyd returned to his seat, and as he did, he placed his Italian leather shoe deliberately on Iverson's back, between his shoulder blades. You'll remain here like this until the meeting concludes. Consider it a lesson in patience and service. Kyle actually applauded. Now that's the Floyd Whitaker I've heard about. Jessica, I told you he wasn't exaggerating his reputation. Iverson didn't move. Didn't speak. His breathing remained steady. His posture perfect despite the weight pressing him down. Floyd felt the familiar rush of control, the satisfaction of demonstrating power, the proof that he was still the alpha he'd always been. But something was wrong. The temperature in the room had dropped. Not dramatically. Just enough that Jessica wrapped her arms around herself and frowned. Is your climate control malfunctioning? It's fine, Floyd said, though he could see his own breath misting slightly. And then he noticed the shadow. Iverson's shadow stretched across the white carpet, cast by the overhead lights. But it was wrong. Too long, too dark, with edges that seemed to pulse and writhe like something alive. As Floyd watched, transfixed, the shadow grew. Not in length but in depth, as if the darkness was pooling beneath Iverson like spilled ink. Kyle had noticed too. His easy smile had frozen, and his eyes were fixed on the shadow with something approaching alarm. What the hell? The merger terms, Floyd interrupted, his voice sharp. He needed to regain control of the room, needed to steer attention away from whatever optical illusion was happening on his carpet. Let's discuss the merger terms. Jessica, you proposed a 60-40 split in your favor. That's unacceptable. But Jessica wasn't looking at him. She was staring at Iverson's shadow, which now seemed to have grown fingers. Long, clawed fingers that spread across the carpet like roots seeking purchase. Floyd, she said slowly, her alpha confidence wavering. What exactly is that man? He's a nanny, Floyd snapped. Focus on the business at hand. His shadow has claws. Kyle had pushed his chair back from the table. Shadows don't have claws, Floyd. It's a trick of the light. Bullshit. Jessica stood abruptly. I've been in enough rooms with enough powerful people to know when something isn't right. That man isn't normal. Beneath Floyd's shoe, Iverson remained perfectly still. But Floyd could feel it now, the vibration. Not physical, but something deeper. Something that resonated in his chest cavity and made his alpha instincts scream conflicting messages. Submit. Run. Protect. Destroy. The shadow on the carpet had stopped growing, but it hadn't shrunk either. It lay there like a living thing, pulsing with its own heartbeat, and the clawed fingers seemed to be reaching toward Jessica and Kyle with deliberate intent. This meeting is over, Kyle announced, already heading for the door. We'll resume discussions at our office. In the city. Where things make sense. You're being ridiculous, Floyd said, but his voice lacked conviction. Because he could see it too. The way the shadow moved independently of the light source, the way it seemed to breathe. Jessica gathered her files with shaking hands. You want to play with monsters in your house, that's your business. But don't expect us to sit here while your pet beta does whatever the hell that is." She gestured at the shadow with disgust and fear. They left quickly, their expensive shoes clicking against marble in their haste to escape. The door slammed shut, and Floyd was alone with Iverson and the impossible shadow. "You can get up," Floyd said, removing his foot. Iverson stood slowly, his movements fluid despite having been used as furniture. He adjusted his glasses, and for a moment, Floyd saw that flicker of gold again, there and gone like lightning behind clouds. "Was that performance satisfactory, Mr. Whitaker?" Iverson's voice held no emotion, no judgment, just that same maddening calm. Floyd's hands were shaking. He gripped the edge of the table to hide it. "What are you?" "I'm your employee." Iverson's shadow was normal now, ordinary and unremarkable. "Is there anything else you need?" "Get out." Iverson left without another word, and Floyd sank into his chair, staring at the spot where the shadow had been, where claws had spread across his carpet, where something ancient and terrible had pressed against the thin veneer of reality. He'd wanted to break Iverson. Instead, he'd given Jessica and Kyle a reason to reconsider the merger entirely. And worse, he'd confirmed what his instincts had been screaming since that first night in the nursery. Iverson Smith was not a beta, was not human possibly, was not something Floyd could control or dominate or dismiss. And Floyd had just humiliated him in front of witnesses, had used him like furniture, had demonstrated the kind of cruelty that might make a predator decide it was time to stop pretending to be prey. He poured himself a drink with trembling hands and tried not to think about what happened when you backed a monster into a corner. Tried not to wonder what Iverson would do now that the mask had slipped, just a little, just enough to show the void underneath. The brooch had belonged to Floyd's mother. White gold and sapphires arranged in the shape of a hummingbird, worth approximately $40,000 but priceless in sentiment. It had sat in the display case in his wife's former dressing room for 3 years, untouched, a relic of a life he'd tried to preserve in amber. Now it was gone. Floyd stood in the dressing room at 7 a.m., staring at the empty velvet indent where the brooch should have been, and felt something cold and terrible unfold in his chest. Monica stood behind him, pale and anxious, her tablet clutched like a shield. "It was definitely here yesterday," she said. "I did the household inventory myself. Everything was accounted for. Who has access to this wing?" Floyd's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded violence. "Only essential staff. The housekeepers, your assistant team, and—" Monica hesitated. "Iverson. He brings Ember through here sometimes. She likes to look at your wife's jewelry collection. He said it helps her remember her mother." Of course he did. Floyd's jaw clenched so hard his molars ached. Of course the beta nanny who'd been unsettling his household for 2 weeks, who'd humiliated him in front of business partners with that shadow trick, who'd wormed his way into Ember's trust with unnatural speed. Of course he was a thief too. Made perfect sense. The too clean background check. The references that seemed manufactured. The way he'd appeared out of nowhere, desperate for the job. He'd probably been casing the estate from day one, cataloging valuables, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Find him," Floyd said. "Bring him to my office. Now." Monica fled, and Floyd stood alone in his dead wife's dressing room, surrounded by her clothes and perfumes and the ghost of a life that should have been. The rage building in him was welcome. It was clean and simple and made sense, unlike the complicated tangle of fear and attraction and confusion Iverson inspired. This, at least, was straightforward. The man was a thief. Floyd would fire him, call the police, and be done with whatever supernatural nonsense had been infecting his home. Iverson arrived 10 minutes later, escorted by Monica and looking characteristically rumpled in that eternal gray sweater. His expression was neutral, curious even, as if he couldn't fathom why he'd been summoned. "Mr. Whitaker." He pushed his glasses up his nose. "Is something wrong?" Floyd didn't invite him to sit. didn't offer any preamble. My mother's brooch is missing from the display case. The hummingbird, white gold and sapphires. You're one of 3 people with access to this wing, and the only one desperate enough to need money. Something flickered across Iverson's face. Not guilt, but something else. Disappointment, maybe. I didn't take your mother's brooch. Of course you didn't. Floyd's voice dripped with sarcasm. Just like you're just a normal beta, and that shadow in my conference room was a trick of the light. Do you think I'm stupid? No, sir. Then don't insult my intelligence by lying. Floyd stepped closer, using his height advantage. His alpha presence rolling off him in waves. I should have known better than to hire someone from an underground network. Should have known when your background was too clean, when you showed up in the rain like some pathetic stray looking for scraps. You saw an opportunity and you took it. Iverson's hands hung loosely at his sides. I understand why you'd think that. But I didn't steal from you. Then where is it? I don't know. Convenient. Floyd's rage was crystallizing into something sharp and cruel. You know what you are, Iverson. You're worthless trash. I took pity on you, gave you a job when no respectable agency would touch you, and this is how you repay me. By stealing from my dead wife's collection. For the first time since Floyd had met him, Iverson's composure cracked. Not in anger or fear, but in something that looked almost like grief. His shoulders sagged, and behind his glasses, his eyes went distant. Worthless trash, he repeated softly, as if testing the words. Is that what you think? It's what I know. Floyd was committed now, the momentum of his anger carrying him forward. You're fired. Effective immediately. I want you off my property in the next 10 minutes, or I'm calling the police and having you arrested for theft. And you can be damn sure I'll make certain you never work in childcare again. I'll destroy whatever pathetic excuse for a career you thought you had. Monica made a small sound of distress, quickly stifled. Iverson just stood there, absorbing the words like blows. His expression unreadable. What about Ember? He asked finally. Ember is my daughter. My responsibility. Not yours. Floyd turned away, unable to look at the man anymore. You were temporary. Replaceable. She'll forget you in a week. The silence stretched so long that Floyd almost turned back around. Then he heard footsteps, slow, measured, moving toward the door. I hope you find your mother's brooch, Mr. Whitaker, Iverson said quietly. And I hope Ember forgives you for this. Then he was gone, and Floyd was alone with his rage and his righteousness and the hollow victory of having finally put the unsettling beta in his place. He told himself it felt good. Told himself the tightness in his chest was satisfaction, not regret. He was lying and he knew it. Iverson left through the front door this time, not the servant's entrance. He walked down the long driveway with that same shuffling gait, his duffel bag over one shoulder, looking exactly as unremarkable and forgettable as he had the day he'd arrived. Floyd watched from his office window, ensuring the man actually left. Monica stood beside him, her expression troubled. Sir, I should mention, Ember woke up crying half an hour ago. She's been asking for Iverson. She'll adjust. Sir. I said she'll adjust. Floyd's tone brooked no argument. Monica left, and Floyd watched Iverson reach the estate gates. The man paused there, just for a moment, looking back at the mansion. Even from this distance, Floyd could see him remove his glasses and wipe them on his sweater. Then Iverson stepped through the gates, and something changed. It wasn't dramatic. There was no thunderclap or flash of light. But Floyd felt it, a sensation like a thread being cut, like a circuit breaking, like warmth draining from a wound. The air pressure in the room shifted. The light coming through the windows seemed dimmer, colder. And Floyd felt wrong. Not sick exactly, but hollowed out, like someone had reached into his chest and scooped away something essential. His alpha senses, usually so sharp and reliable, felt muffled, distant. His scent went flat and sour. His limbs felt heavy, uncoordinated. He gripped the windowsill for support, watching Iverson disappear down the tree-lined road, and the wrongness intensified. His stomach churned. His vision swam. His skin felt too tight, too cold, like he was coming down with flu, except this was worse. This was cellular, biological, something fundamental to his existence protesting violently. From 3 floors above, a child began to scream. Not a nightmare scream. Not a tantrum. A sound of absolute primal terror. The kind of sound that pierced straight through walls and reason and went directly to every parental instinct Floyd possessed. He moved on autopilot, his body struggling against the strange lethargy, taking the stairs in a stumbling rush. Staff members pressed themselves against walls as he passed, their expressions alarmed. Monica was already at Ember's door, pale and shaking. "She won't stop," Monica gasped. "She's asking for Iverson. She keeps saying he's gone, over and over." Floyd shoved past her into the nursery. Ember was on the floor, surrounded by her blocks, but she wasn't arranging them. She was clutching them to her chest and rocking, her small body racked with sobs, her face red and wet and contorted with anguish. When she saw Floyd, she didn't run to him. She screamed louder. "Make him come back." Her voice was raw, breaking. "Papa, make him come back. He promised he'd stay. He promised I was safe." Floyd knelt beside her, reaching out, and she flinched away from his touch. The rejection was a knife to the chest, sharp and vicious. "Ember, sweetheart. You sent him away." She was hyperventilating now, her words coming in gasps. "You hurt him and you sent him away, and now it's cold again. Everything's cold." Floyd tried to gather her into his arms, and she fought him, her small fists hitting his chest with surprising strength. "I hate you. Bring him back. Bring Iverson back." He held her as she struggled, his own body feeling weaker by the second, and realized with dawning horror that she was right. The house was cold. Not temperature cold, but something deeper. The warmth, that indefinable sense of safety and shelter that made a house a home, had vanished the moment Iverson crossed the threshold. Floyd's alpha instincts, which should have been roaring with protective rage, were whimpering. His scent had gone completely sour, and he could smell his own distress, bitter and wrong like milk gone bad. Every cell in his body was screaming that something vital was missing, that he'd severed a connection he hadn't known existed until it was gone. Ember finally exhausted herself, collapsing against his chest in hiccuping sobs, and Floyd held her on the floor of her nursery, feeling sicker by the moment. His vision was graying at the edges. His hands were trembling. His heart was beating too fast, then too slow, like his entire cardiovascular system couldn't remember its rhythm. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his usually stoic face lined with concern. "Boss, you need to see this. The food. Everything in the kitchen is going bad. The milk curdled in the fridge. The bread has mold. Everything that was fresh this morning is rotting." "That's impossible," Floyd whispered, but he knew it wasn't. Knew that somehow Iverson's presence had been maintaining something, some invisible barrier or blessing or protection, and now that he was gone, the house itself was failing. "Also," Marcus continued, his voice dropping, "there's something you should know about the brooch. One of the housekeepers just came forward. Said she saw Ember playing with it yesterday, carrying it around like a toy. She put it somewhere in the house, but she can't remember where. The housekeeper was too afraid to say anything earlier." Floyd closed his eyes. The brooch. The accusation. The words he'd spat like venom. Worthless trash. He'd destroyed the one person who'd been protecting them. The one person who'd made Ember feel safe. The one person whose presence had apparently been holding back something dark and cold and hungry. And now that person was gone, and the house was dying, and Ember was inconsolable, and Floyd could feel his own biology shutting down like systems failing one by one. "Find him," Floyd gasped, still holding his sobbing daughter. "Send everyone. Find Iverson Smith and bring him back. Tell him." His throat closed up. Pride and desperation warred in his chest. "Tell him I was wrong. Tell him we need him. Tell him I'm sorry. But Monica was already running, and Marcus was shouting orders to the security team. And Floyd was left alone with Ember in a house that suddenly felt like a tomb, waiting for a predator he'd insulted and dismissed to decide whether or not they were worth saving. They came at dusk, when the security shift was changing and the house was at its most vulnerable. Floyd was in the nursery with Ember, trying unsuccessfully to get her to eat something, when the first window shattered downstairs. His alpha instinct should have kicked in immediately. Territorial aggression, protective fury, the biological imperative to defend his home and offspring. Instead, he felt only that same hollow wrongness that had plagued him for the past 6 hours since Iverson left. His body was sluggish, unresponsive, like trying to run through deep water. Marcus's voice crackled through the intercom. "Boss, we have a breach. Multiple hostiles, professional grade. Get Ember to the safe room." The intercom cut off with a burst of static. Floyd grabbed Ember, who'd gone rigid with fear, and ran for the hallway. But the house that should have been familiar was suddenly a maze of wrong turns and shadows that moved independently of light. His security system, state-of-the-art and supposedly impenetrable, had gone dark. Emergency lights flickered and died. He made it halfway down the hall before 3 men in tactical gear rounded the corner. Not security. Not police. Mercenaries, their faces obscured by black masks, weapons raised. Floyd pushed Ember behind him and let his alpha pheromones flood the corridor, a last-ditch attempt to intimidate, to dominate, to make them hesitate. Nothing happened. His scent, usually powerful enough to make grown men submit, barely registered. The wrongness had stripped him of everything that made him dangerous. The lead mercenary laughed, and even through the mask, Floyd recognized the voice. "Little Jason." "That's disappointing, Floyd." Kyle lowered his weapon slightly, though the others kept theirs trained on Floyd's chest. "I expected more from the great alpha billionaire. You smell like rotting garbage. What happened? Your pet monster abandoned you." Floyd's blood went cold. "This is about the merger. This is about power." Kyle gestured, and 2 of his men moved forward. "Jessica and I realized something after our little meeting. We're weak. Compromised. That nanny of yours, whatever the hell he was the only thing keeping you stable. Now he's gone, and you're just a sick alpha with a broken kid and a house full of assets we're going to strip. You're insane." "I'm pragmatic." Kyle nodded toward Ember, who was sobbing silently behind Floyd's legs. "The girl's the leverage. Once we have her, you'll sign everything over to save her. Then we'll decide whether to keep you alive or let the sickness finish you off." Floyd lunged. It was instinct, desperation, paternal rage overriding self-preservation. But his body betrayed him. Too slow, too weak, too fundamentally broken. One of the mercenaries caught him with a rifle but to the solar plexus, and Floyd went down hard, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Through the haze of pain, he watched Kyle reach for Ember. Watched his daughter try to run and trip over her own feet. Watched rough hands grab her small arms as she screamed for her papa, for Iverson, for anyone to make it stop. "No," Floyd choked out, crawling forward on the expensive hallway carpet. "Please. Take anything. The company, the money, everything. Just don't hurt her." Kyle crouched beside him, close enough that Floyd could see the triumph in his eyes through the mask. "Too late for bargaining, Floyd. You should have accepted our terms when you had the chance." One of the mercenaries had Ember now, her small body thrashing uselessly in his grip. She was screaming Iverson's name over and over, the sound raw and primal, and Floyd felt something in his chest crack apart. This was his fault. His arrogance, his cruelty, his need to dominate and control. He'd driven away the one person who could protect them, and now his daughter would pay the price. Then the air changed. It happened so suddenly that even Kyle noticed, his head snapping up in alarm. The temperature plummeted, not gradually but instantly, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. Floyd's breath misted in front of his face. Ice crystals formed on the walls. And the air became heavy, not thick or humid but heavy in a way that had nothing to do with atmospheric pressure. It felt like gravity had increased tenfold, like invisible hands were pressing down on Floyd's chest, making each breath a conscious struggle. The mercenaries felt it too. They stumbled, their weapons drooping, their bodies sagging under an impossible weight. "What the fuck?" Kyle gasped, dropping to one knee. The hallway lights flickered back on, but wrong. Too bright, casting shadows that moved against the angles of light. And in those shadows, something was forming. Not gradually materializing, but resolving, like Floyd's eyes were finally seeing what had always been there. Iverson stood at the end of the hallway. But not Iverson as Floyd had known him. This version wore black tactical gear that seemed to drink in light, fitted perfectly to a body that was no longer slouched or apologetic. His hair was pulled back, revealing a face that was sharper, more angular, inhumanly beautiful in the way that poisonous things were beautiful. And his eyes, no glasses now to hide them, burned with liquid gold that swirled and pulsed like molten metal. His scent hit the hallway like a physical force. Ancient ozone and blood, deep ocean trenches and lightning strikes. The smell of something that had existed long before humans named themselves Alpha and Omega and Beta. It bypassed Floyd's conscious mind and went straight to his hindbrain, to the part that still remembered when humanity was prey. Every alpha instinct Floyd possessed screamed the same message, crystal clear and undeniable. Apex predator. Run. Submit. Die. Kyle tried to raise his weapon, and Iverson's gaze fixed on him. Just that, just looking, and Kyle's hands went slack. The gun clattered to the floor. His mouth opened in a soundless scream as his body betrayed him, muscles locking, nervous system shutting down in the face of something it couldn't process. Let her go. Iverson's voice was still quiet, but it resonated in frequencies that made Floyd's bones ache. It wasn't a request. It was reality rewriting itself around his will. The mercenary holding Ember released her like she'd burned him. She ran immediately, not to Floyd, but to Iverson, and he caught her with infinite gentleness, lifting her into his arms without taking his eyes off the intruders. "Shoo!" he murmured against her hair, and the subsonic hum from the nursery was back, that resonance that made the air vibrate with safety. "I've got you. Nothing here can hurt you. I promise." Kyle was on his knees now, blood running from his nose. His eyes rolled back. The other mercenaries were in similar states, collapsed or convulsing or staring at nothing, their weapons forgotten, their bodies shutting down system by system. Iverson wasn't touching them, wasn't even looking at most of them. He was simply existing in their vicinity, and that existence was enough to unmake them. "You came into my territory," Iverson said, his voice carrying that terrible, resonant quality. "Threatened what is mine. Touched what I protect." He took a step forward and the air pressure increased. Floyd heard bones creak, heard someone whimper. "Did you think there would be no consequences?" Kyle managed to look up, his face a mask of blood and terror. "What are you?" Iverson's smile was not human. "I'm the thing alphas tell their children about to make them behave. I'm the reason you check under your bed. I'm the predator that made your ancestors huddle around fires and pray to gods who couldn't help them." Another step, and Kyle's body began to seize. "I'm an enigma. And you just made the mistake of threatening my family." Floyd wanted to look away but couldn't. Wanted to intervene but couldn't move. Could only watch as Iverson's presence, his mere proximity, caused the mercenaries' bodies to rebel against them. Hearts stuttering, lungs forgetting to breathe, brains misfiring in cascades of neurons that couldn't handle the input. None of them would die. Floyd understood that instinctively. Iverson was being merciful in his way. But they'd wish they had died. Their minds would never recover from this, from experiencing a predator so far above them on the evolutionary ladder that their biology couldn't comprehend it. Kyle collapsed completely, unconscious or catatonic, and Iverson finally turned his attention to Floyd. Those golden eyes pinned him to the floor more effectively than any weapon. Floyd felt his alpha pride, his ego, His sense of self-importance crumble under that gaze. He was nothing. Less than nothing. A child playing at being dangerous while the real danger had been living in his house, sleeping in his servants' quarters, scrubbing his floors and enduring his insults. "Worthless trash," Iverson said softly, and Floyd flinched like he'd been struck. "That's what you called me." "I'm sorry," Floyd gasped, the words torn from somewhere deep and primal. "I'm so sorry. I was wrong. About everything." Iverson studied him for a long moment, Ember quiet and safe in his arms, and Floyd waited for judgment. For punishment. For whatever terrible thing an enigma did to alphas who'd forgotten their place. Instead, Iverson's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You were protecting yourself the only way you knew how. Lashing out. Asserting dominance. It's what wounded alphas do. I drove you away." "You did." Iverson walked closer, and Floyd's body wanted to crawl backward, wanted to bare his throat, wanted to submit in every way biology could express it. "But Ember called me. Her distress, her need. It sang through every cell I possess. I would have come back even if you'd ordered me never to return. 'Cause she is mine now, Floyd. Mine to protect. Mine to keep safe. And me." Floyd hated how small his voice sounded. Hated the desperate hope in it. Iverson crouched beside him, still holding Ember, and reached out to touch Floyd's face. His hand was cold and impossibly gentle, and where his fingers made contact, Floyd felt warmth flood back into his body. The wrongness began to recede. His alpha senses flickered back to life. "You," Iverson murmured, his golden eyes searching Floyd's face, "are mine to fix, mine to teach, mine to break and rebuild until you understand what you truly are." "What am I?" Iverson's smile was terrible and beautiful. "You're the protected one now, Floyd. The one who gets to stop being strong all the time. The one who gets to rest while I keep the monsters away." He leaned in close, his breath cold against Floyd's ear. "You just have to accept it. Accept me. Accept that your alpha pride means nothing to a predator who existed before your kind learned to walk upright." Floyd should have been terrified. Should have rejected this, fought back, reclaimed his dominance and his territory and his sense of self. Instead, he felt the last resistance crumble. Felt something ancient and tired and broken inside him finally exhale. Felt the weight of being the strongest, the smartest, the one everyone relied on, lift from shoulders that had been carrying it far too long. "I accept," he whispered, and meant it. Iverson's eyes flashed with something that might have been satisfaction or possession or both. Then he stood, pulling Floyd up with casual strength that belied his appearance, and the three of them stood together in the hallway surrounded by unconscious mercenaries. "Good," Iverson said. "Now let's go put Ember to bed. Then you and I are going to have a very long conversation about rules and respect and what happens to alphas who forget that there are things in this world more dangerous than they could ever be." Floyd nodded, docile and strangely content, and followed his enigma nanny toward the stairs. The police came at midnight. Monica had called them, though by the time they arrived, there was nothing for them to do except document the scene and cart away 7 catatonic mercenaries who couldn't remember their own names, let alone who'd hired them. Kyle Jason was taken to a psychiatric facility, his mind so thoroughly broken that he couldn't form coherent sentences. The investigation would eventually trace the conspiracy back to Jessica Crane, who would disappear before charges could be filed, her assets frozen and her reputation destroyed. But Floyd barely registered any of it. He sat in his study while uniformed officers moved through his house, Ember asleep against his chest, and felt the fundamental shift in his reality settle into his bones like sediment finding the bottom of a river. Iverson stood at the window, his back to Floyd, still wearing that black tactical gear that made him look like something carved from midnight. He hadn't said much since putting Ember to bed the first time, before she'd woken crying and refused to let Floyd go. Hadn't explained where he'd been or how he'd known to return at exactly the right moment. Hadn't demanded apologies or groveling or any of the things Floyd would have demanded in his position. He just existed, a gravitational force around which everything else had to orient. When the last officer finally left and Monica closed the door behind them with obvious relief, Iverson turned from the window. His eyes were still gold, still inhuman, though some of the terrible intensity had banked to a low simmer. "Put her to bed," he said quietly. "Then come back here." It wasn't a suggestion. Floyd stood carefully, cradling Ember's sleeping weight, and carried her upstairs. The house felt different now. Warmer, safer, like whatever protection had vanished with Iverson's departure had returned threefold. He tucked Ember into her bed, kissing her forehead the way he hadn't done since before his wife died, and watched her small face relax into peaceful dreams. She'd called Iverson back. Her need had summoned an apex predator across whatever distance he'd traveled. Floyd didn't understand the mechanics of it, didn't understand most of what had happened tonight, but he understood this. His daughter had claimed Iverson first, and in doing so, she'd saved them both. When Floyd returned to the study, Iverson was sitting in Floyd's chair, the high-backed leather throne from which Floyd had ruled his empire for a decade. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Floyd stopped in the doorway, unsure for the first time in his adult life where he was supposed to be, what he was supposed to do. "Close the door," Iverson said. Floyd did. His hands were shaking again, that tremor he couldn't quite control, aftermath of adrenaline and biological upheaval and the complete dismantling of everything he'd thought he knew about power. "Come here." Floyd crossed the room on legs that felt unreliable. When he reached the desk, Iverson gestured to the floor beside the chair, and Floyd understood. Understood what was being asked. Understood that this was the moment where he either accepted the new order or tried futilely to cling to the old one. He knelt. The Persian rug was soft against his knees. From this angle, looking up at Iverson in his chair, Floyd felt something slot into place. Some instinct that had been fighting against itself finally surrendering. His alpha biology was screaming conflicting messages. Submit, fight, protect, flee. But underneath all that noise was something quieter, something that whispered this is right. Iverson reached out and removed his tactical gloves, one finger at a time, the gesture deliberate and intimate. Then he touched Floyd's face, tilting his chin up so their eyes met. Gold and blue, predator and prey, something ancient and something newly born. "Do you understand what you are to me now?" Iverson asked. Floyd's throat was dry. "No. You're mine." Iverson's thumb traced Floyd's jawline, the touch possessive and gentle. "Mine to protect, mine to discipline, mine to keep. This house, this territory, this family. All of it exists under my sufferance now. Do you accept that?" Every alpha instinct Floyd possessed howled in protest. He'd built this empire. This was his house, his company, his life. He was the one who dominated, who controlled, who decided. But he'd also watched that empire crumble in 6 hours without Iverson's presence. Had felt his own biology turn against him. Had been helpless while mercenaries grabbed his daughter. Had knelt on this same rug and scrubbed scotch from it while Iverson's shadow grew claws on the wall. The truth was, he'd never been in control. He'd just been allowed to believe he was. "I accept," Floyd whispered. Iverson's expression softened, and he leaned down to press his forehead against Floyd's. A gesture that felt ceremonial, weighted with significance Floyd didn't fully understand. When Iverson exhaled, his breath carried that scent of ozone and ancient things, and Floyd felt it sink into his skin, his bloodstream, his marrow, marking him, claiming him, making him something other than what he'd been. Floyd gasped as the sensation flooded through him, not painful but overwhelming, like every nerve ending had suddenly come alive. His alpha pheromones, which had been sour and broken, rearranged themselves into something new. Something that still smelled like him, coffee and cedar, but with an undercurrent now, a bass note of ocean depths and ozone that marked him as belonging to something greater. "There," Iverson murmured against his skin. "Now anyone with enough sense will know you're under protection, that you're claimed, that touching you means dealing with me." Floyd's hands came up instinctively, gripping Iverson's thighs for balance, and felt muscle like steel under the tactical fabric. This close, he could hear Iverson's heartbeat, Slower than human, steady as tides, impossibly calm. What are you? Floyd asked, not for the first time but with different weight now. Not accusatory. Genuinely curious. I'm what happens when evolution takes a left turn into territory that shouldn't exist. Iverson pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Enigmas are older than your categories of alpha and omega and beta. We're what your kind instinctively fears because we remind you that you're not the apex. That there are things in the dark that could unmake you with a thought. Why work as a nanny? Why hide? Because enigmas are hunted, studied, feared. Iverson's jaw tightened. I've spent 30 years moving from place to place, never staying long enough to be noticed. But then I felt Ember's distress, a child in survival mode, abandoned by a father too broken to see her. And I couldn't walk away. You came for her. I came for her, Iverson agreed. But I stayed for you. Floyd's breath caught. Why? Because I saw what you were under all that armor. A man who'd convinced himself that strength meant isolation, that vulnerability was weakness, that asking for help was failure. Iverson's hand moved to Floyd's hair, fingers threading through it with unexpected tenderness. You needed someone to tell you it was okay to stop, to rest, to let someone else carry the weight for a while. Tears burned in Floyd's eyes, hot and humiliating and utterly unstoppable. I don't know how to not be in control. I know. That's why I'm going to teach you. Iverson pulled him closer, and Floyd went willingly, resting his head against Iverson's thigh like a supplicant seeking benediction. It won't be easy. Your instincts will fight me. Your pride will make you lash out. But I'm patient, Floyd. I've waited 30 years for something worth protecting. I can wait for you to understand what you've become. What have I become? Safe. Iverson's hand stroked through his hair, soothing and possessive. For the first time in your life you're safe. You don't have to be the strongest anymore. Don't have to make every decision. Don't have to carry everything alone. You can just be Floyd. A father, a partner, a man who's allowed to need someone. Floyd broke then, truly broke, great shaking sobs tearing through him as years of pressure finally found release. He cried for his wife, for his daughter, for the man he'd been and the man he'd pretended to be. Cried for every night he'd worked until dawn, every decision that felt like life or death, every moment he'd been terrified that if he showed weakness, everything would collapse. Iverson held him through it, one hand in his hair and the other resting on his shoulder, grounding him. Didn't tell him to stop or pull himself together. Just let him shatter in the safety of the study that was no longer his throne room but had become something else, a sanctuary where broken alphas could learn to be human again. When Floyd finally quieted, his throat raw and his face wet, Iverson tilted his chin up again. Better. Floyd nodded, not trusting his voice. Good. Now listen carefully, because these are the new rules. Iverson's tone shifted, becoming formal, the weight of ceremony settling over them. You will continue to run your company, but I will vet all major decisions. You will not work past 8 p.m. unless there's genuine emergency. You will eat 3 meals a day and sleep at least 7 hours a night. You will spend 1 hour each day with Ember, and during that hour you will not check your phone or think about work. That's non-negotiable. Iverson's eyes flashed gold. You hired me to take care of your daughter. I'm expanding that job description to include you, which means you follow my rules, or you face consequences. Floyd should have been outraged, should have argued. Instead, he felt something like relief unfurl in his chest. What kind of consequences? Iverson's smile was sharp and promising. The kind that remind you why alphas used to pray to things that lived in the dark. But also the kind that help you learn. I'm not interested in breaking you, Floyd. I'm interested in rebuilding you into something sustainable. And if I can't, if my instincts are too strong, then I'll be patient. I'll redirect. I'll discipline when necessary. Iverson leaned in close, his breath cold against Floyd's ear. But make no mistake, you're mine now. And I take care of what's mine. Floyd shivered, And it wasn't entirely from fear. Okay. Okay, what? Okay, sir. The word felt strange, wrong, right all at once. Iverson's smile widened. We'll work on that. For now, go shower and get some sleep. Tomorrow we're having a family dinner. You, me, and Ember. A real dinner where you sit and eat and talk, not just check your phone between bites. Floyd stood on unsteady legs, and Iverson stood with him, still taller, still overwhelming, still impossibly present. Before Floyd could step away, Iverson pulled him into an embrace. Not romantic, not sexual, but something deeper. Territorial. Protective. The kind of hold that said you're safe here, with a finality that made Floyd's knees weak. Thank you, Floyd whispered against Iverson's shoulder. For coming back. For not leaving us. I'll always come back, Iverson promised. That's what it means to be claimed by an enigma. You don't get rid of us easily. Floyd managed a weak laugh, and Iverson released him. As Floyd walked toward the door, he paused and looked back. Iverson was still standing by the desk, his golden eyes tracking Floyd's movement, his presence filling the room like gravity. Iverson. Yes. The glasses. Were they just an illusion? Iverson's smile was almost fond. Everything about me was an illusion, Floyd. The slouch, the submission, the compliance. I was exactly what you needed to see until you were ready to see the truth. Floyd nodded slowly, processing that. And now you see me. And you understand that what you thought was strength was just armor. Real strength is letting that armor go. Trusting someone else to protect you while you learn to be human again. Floyd left then, climbing the stairs to his bedroom on autopilot. He showered until the water ran cold, washing away sweat and tears and the remnants of the man he'd been. When he finally collapsed into bed, he slept deeper than he had in years, dreamless and safe. Down the hall, Ember slept peacefully, her blocks arranged in a new pattern. Not perfect rows, but a house shape, with two tall blocks standing side by side at the door like guardians. And in the nursery's doorway, Iverson stood watch the way he would every night from now on. His golden eyes scanning the darkness. His enigma senses spread across the territory he'd claimed. Outside, the world continued spinning. Floyd's company would survive. Jessica Crane would face justice. Life would move forward. But inside this house, in this sanctuary protected by something ancient and terrible and infinitely gentle, a broken alpha learned to rest. A traumatized child learned to speak. And an enigma who'd hidden for 30 years finally found something worth revealing himself for. Family. Fractured and strange and held together by bonds that transcended biology. But a family nonetheless. And in the morning, when Ember woke and ran to the kitchen to find both her fathers waiting with breakfast and smiles and time, actual undivided time, she spoke her first full sentence since her mother died. I love you both. Floyd cried again, but this time it felt like healing. And Iverson, who'd forgotten what it meant to be loved, who'd convinced himself that predators didn't need such human things, discovered that even monsters could find home in the most unexpected places. In the wreckage of an alpha's pride. In the courage of a child who refused to give up. In the sanctuary built by worthless trash who turned out to be the most valuable thing any of them had ever known. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?